14th.
You gotta give me a cue to put it on.
Thought you were watching the clock. Okay. It's June 14th, 2021. I'd like to call the meeting of the Budget Review Committee to order. We are in the Aldermatic Chamber, and there's also availability for people to attend by phone or teleconference via Zoom or by TV channel 16. So would the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman Jettie,
I'm here in the chamber.
Alderman Schmidt,
I am present in the chamber.
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly,
I'm here, Malone, and I can hear everyone.
Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present in the chamber. Alderman at Large Laurie Wiltshire,
I am present.
and our chairman, Richard Dowd.
Yes, I am present. I'm in the chamber.
Mr. Chairman, also in attendance, we have Alderman Lou. Also in attendance this evening is John Griffin, CFO Controller, and David G. Fredette, Treasurer and Tax Collector, both of the city of Nashua.
Okay, very good. The first item of business we have this evening is public comment. Is there anyone that wishes to be heard on items on the agenda this evening that would like to say something in public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move on to communications.
There are none.
Unfinished business.
None.
New business resolutions.
There are none.
New business ordinances.
There are none.
Tabled in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to remove from the table R-21-142 by roll call. R-21-142 is relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2022 proposed budget for the city of Nashua, general enterprise and special revenue funds. There will be a public hearing scheduled for June 21st at 2021 at 7 p.m. in the Nashua High School North Auditorium.
Thank you. Would you please call the roll?
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Wiltshire,
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien votes yes. Alderwoman Kelly,
Yes.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion carries, and R-21-142 is now back on the table. This evening, we're going to be reviewing Departments 126 Financial Services, 1001 Capital Improvements. We'll also be looking at SURF, and Department 159 Hydrant Fees, 162 Street Lighting, 193 Debt Service, 194 Contingency, and 198 Interfunds Transfer. First item will be Department 126 Financial Services. Mr. Griffin and Mr. Fredette, would you like to come up and sit?
Sure, thank you.
Now we get into the real meat of the budget. Okay, so financial services revenues on page 33 and 34, although I think he may direct us to another page as well, and appropriations on 136.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
John Griffin, Chief Financial Officer. If I may say a few words before we begin.
sure.
First of all, it's great to see you all without a mask and in person. Chambers look fantastic. I can see whatever I need to see here, but thanks to everybody that was part of this. As far as financials, the Financial Services Division, we were able to continue all of our activities, both in the city and remotely. Most of the things we try to achieve, which is a high bond rating, AAA, achievement award of financial reporting and so forth, and trying to maximize the revenues that we generally do well with. I'd like to thank every single member of the Financial Services Division for their diligence, effort, and tremendous customer service over the last year. I had the pleasure of working in the partial reopening, July 6th of 2020, conceptualizing the appointment setting with a great team to kind of work out the kinks. And most currently, with the completion of the motor vehicle area and tax area, welcoming those individuals back into those areas and really feeling very proud about the work they do each and every day for our citizens. Sometimes on the back end, financial services doesn't get recognized, but they just put a tremendous amount of effort in very difficult times. And matter of fact, if I think back almost a year ago, I was in the line with them outside trying to greet our customers, make them feel comfortable, especially during that time with the pandemic raging. So thank you for allowing me to say that at the beginning, and we'll look forward to reviewing our budgets and other areas of appropriations. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will let Mr. Fredette review the revenues. He'll also review the 126 Financial Services Division. He'll review debt service, and then I'll handle most of the others as well. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fredette?
Yes, thank you. You want to go to page 33
33.
in the yellow pages?
Yep.
It's, this sheet here is called Other General Government, and it's really miscellaneous type revenues that we collect. The largest being, of course, cable TV franchise fees of around $900,000 a year. There's really not too much changes here, there seldom are. The biggest change, and I think, John, you can talk about it, is this interest income from 201 Main Street.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, if I may, John Griffin,
Yes.
CFO. You're going to see two new line items in this particular budget, one revenue, one expense. As you recall, the Board of Aldermen approved the comprehensive package relative to the Performing Arts Center. Part of that package contained a loan of about $7 million from the city to a third party. I think it's the Realty Corp. There's two distinct non-profits, or non-taxable entities. But this is literally 1% annually of that amount that was loaned to the Performing Arts Center, one of the Performing Arts Center entities.
That's 45,208.
That's, excuse me, that's 45,208, that's correct.
Mhm.
Prior to going to the 126 appropriations, I'm going to point out, Mr. Chairman, another line item that we added, and I'll explain that when we get there. But thank you, Mr. Fredette, for letting me explain that. Thank you.
Okay. Treasurer Fredette?
The other item on the bottom is account 49720, transfers from UAW Education ETF. That's,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I could explain that. As you recall, during the approval of the most recent UAW contract, the UAW members agreed to fund what I would refer to in fiscal '22 as a one-time increase for those lower-paid individuals. And they funded it with an amount included in the Education Expendable Trust Fund that generally gets an appropriation every year. I believe you've already reviewed the human resources budget. That's what that 10,000 amount is every year, and it's for educational pursuits of the UAW members. They decided, because of the significant amount of balance they had, that they would rather have applied it to the UAW members that got that one-time increase that Director Kleiner would have reviewed with you at the approval of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
is there any
Treasurer
questions?
Fredette?
I don't know if there's any questions on this page.
Any questions on page 33 of the general fund estimated revenue? Kim Kleiner just joined us. I don't see anybody's hand up. Just have a couple questions, real quick. On the 45,880, the clock tower, the previous year was 30K, that's because they were behind in paying us, right?
That's my
Now
recollection.
they're back to the
Mr. Chair.
10,000 a year, okay.
Correct.
Yep, just want to make that clear for people. And, I think most everything else is. Pretty level. Are there any questions from anyone on that page? If not, we'll move on. Treasurer Fedette?
Alderwoman Lou has her hand up.
Alderwoman Kelly?
Lou.
Oh, Lou.
I was just pointing out that I believe Alderwoman
Oh.
Lou has her hand up, yes.
All right. Yep. Alderwoman Lou? Hello? Are you on mute? Alderwoman Lou? I think she dropped off.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. It looks like she dropped off.
All right. Treasurer Fedette.
Okay, page 34, which is the financial services page for revenue, which consists of majority of the revenue brought in besides the school department and for the city. Things here are fairly flat, except for, let me see, I don't think there's really that much change in.
Looks like most everything's pretty level.
The one area that is down is, I think this 43,516 municipal state aid, we received that over a 2-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And fiscal year 21 was the last year of that 2-year period, so there is none of that coming. I believe there's in the works of some increases in a few of the items on this page, but we have heard nothing or received anything formally from the state. But if something changes that we get from the state, we're required to use that number when we fill out the tax rate sheets in the fall. So if something does go up or down, but as far as I hear it, it could go up, that would help with the tax rate at the end of the period. But
Okay.
the main area here is, of course, motor vehicle permit fees and that whole section there. Interest income is a little lower than last year. As you probably know, rates are very, very low. They have been for over a year, and they still are. And I'm not sure if I'll even make the amount I budgeted last year, but we should be close.
Okay.
That's really what's mostly in here is motor vehicle. That is the biggest part of this sheet.
Okay. Any questions on this page? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So tax revenue, 41,221, the payment in lieu of taxes.
Yes.
I see last year you budgeted 150, but we actually got over 400,000, and you're looking at 420 for next year. Why did we get more than you thought?
Because between last year and this year, they have a new pilot with the Hunt community.
Uh-huh.
And that was not a pilot last year, so that's why the revenue is up this year.
Okay, and could you explain the payment in lieu of taxes? This is from entities that are exempt from tax, but they make an agreement to pay something in lieu of taxes voluntarily, or reach some agreement with the city. Can you explain how?
Well, of course, that's all done by assessing and legal, but yes, the two that we have now is National Housing Authority has a pilot with us, has had one since 1946 or 47. I looked at the original resolution this year on that, and that formula is based on rents. It's very different than any other pilot. And then the hunt was something that was negotiated, I believe, between the city and that group. But yes, they're considered nonprofits, but there's always discussion on exactly, exactly how nonprofit are they. So, like I said, I don't get involved in the negotiations with them. So, but that's done by legal and assessment, and everything, I believe, is approved by the Board of Assessors.
Anything additional, Alderman Jennings?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So entities like, the two hospitals and Riviera University, the churches, I guess other schools, are they all tax exempt? Do they pay no taxes?
Well, some of them are, but the hospitals pay some taxes. They're not a pilots. They go through the system and they actually get a tax bill. And as far as I know, churches are exempt unless one of their buildings are being used for something that is not church-related, which I don't think happens too much here in Nashua, so. But the hospitals do pay some taxes, both hospitals, other agencies too, pay through a regular tax bill. They just get some type of reduction, some type of a charitable reduction on the bill itself. And I think that's also usually done through Board of Assessors with discussion with the groups.
And what about like Riviera University? Are they exempt or do they pay anything?
Well, I'm sure they pay some taxes on their dining room services and things like that, but I wouldn't know offhand exactly how much that would be.
Okay, so I'm speaking specifically of the real estate tax.
Well, if they have well, you really need to talk to the assessing department about that. It's not, I don't determine what tax somebody pays. We do the billing and the collection of it.
Well, I'm not
I don't know how
asking-
much
I'm
Revere
not
College
asking you-
pays.
I know you don't make the decision. I'm just asking you, do we get anything or don't we? And why?
I believe we get something from the college. I don't know what that amount is.
I think it depends on the use of the building. I think if the building's being used for education, it gets a waiver. I know in the hospitals, we had issues where they were buying buildings and using them for doctor's offices, and I think we had an agreement several years ago on some payment of taxes, because it wasn't actually being used for the hospital. So the specifics of what they pay, he's right, would be in the assessor's office, but generally, educational facilities and churches are exempt.
Okay. So could I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So, so this amount, this 420, can you provide us with an itemization as to who's paying that, where that
Well,
420?
this year, 152,000 was from National Housing Authority, and the remaining was from the hunt.
Okay, and those are the only two? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the revenue? All right,
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
yes.
I would like to speak to the committee about the school revenues.
Yes, and pink pages?
This would be on page
Yellow page.
46.
What is it?
Page 46 in the yellow pages.
Yes, okay.
And the reason why I want to speak to the committee at this time on this page is because most of the revenue, as you've gone through the other budgets, most of the revenue is what the Treasurer Fredette just spoke about, and the school department revenues. With regard to the school department revenues, if I look at account 43,549, state adequacy aid, that's what Mayor Donches speaks to when we look at fiscal '21 estimated revenues and fiscal '22. He speaks to that sizable reduction due to three things, actually. One is free and reduced lunch reductions, because everybody got a free lunch, so to speak. The reduction in ADM, which is the head count of students, which I think Mr. Donovan indicated was about 860, less students in fiscal '21 than '20. And then, as you may recall, the legislature provided one-time revenues to augment the free and reduced lunch by about 1.5 million. So that's why you see that reduction. As the mayor planned his proposed budget, we became aware of the American Rescue Plan Act. And as a placeholder, what the mayor is proposing, and he's spoken about this on a few occasions, what's referred to as lost revenue. So we're learning about how to calculate lost revenue, but it's clear that we can use intergovernmental amounts, not federal amounts, but any loss of intergovernmental amounts such as state revenue would be part of the calculation. So, and I did also review the meeting that you had the other night with the school department, and I am aware of certain bills that would like to restore funding at pre-pandemic levels, but we're not sure if that's going to prevail. That's where they essentially take the ADM counts and the free and reduced counts October 1st of 2019 and instead of October 1st, 2020. And I know that, as the mayor indicates, the delegation's working very hard to restore that money. To the extent it isn't restored, the plan that the mayor has portrayed here is to use American Rescue Plan Act. Now, if you think about a lost revenue calculation, if the state restores the revenue, we don't have lost revenue. So you're not going to need the American Rescue Plan Act for that. So we'll just, as Treasurer Fredette says, we're going through the budget setting process. We're going through the knowledge of what the state legislature does, what Governor Sununu signs, and then the tax setting process in September, October, November. You will get from us the mayor's analysis of surplus and overlay on or around September 1st. And I promise to bring the escrow amounts in first reading in July, so you can review them in August and then approve them first reading in September. And the mayor is on board with that, so we're going to have a lot of work to do in that regard. But I wanted to share this with you, that this is a tremendous loss of revenue, and it definitely impacts the tax rate. But putting the 4.4 in there helps out a little bit. But as we go forward, I can speak further on it. But I wanted to share with you that Mr. Donovan would have handled this as well, but I was more familiar with the revenue of the American Rescue Plan Act.
So if the lost revenue, we don't lose that revenue, we'll be in a better position than if we do and use the 4.4?
We would, my hope is that the state legislature restores the revenue to pre-pandemic levels. That's going to automatically reduce the amount of loss we have.
Right,
So we can use the ARPA funds for some other use.
okay.
When everyone talks about the ARPA funds, they say, use these as a last resort. Go through your planning process, which the mayor is doing now. Don't use them unless you absolutely have to, because there's other funding sources out there. Mr. Donovan did a great job articulating the CARES Act revenues that he has in.
Mm-hmm.
I think his ARPA is called ESSER. I mean, there's all kinds of acronyms, but to use it as lost revenue, the whole plan of it's one of the cogs in the plan of the act itself is to restore some fiscal stability to the municipalities.
Okay.
And we were one of the cities, as you know, that got direct aid, and it's safely in the treasurer's account right now, and we did receive the aid, which is good. $8 million this year, we'll get $8 million next year. 12 months from when we got the first $8 million. And the whole key here is to use it as efficiently and effectively as possible.
Okay. Alderman O'Brien, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Mr. Griffin, for mentioning what I would call the chaos up in Concord. As a member of the New Hampshire House, I never saw anything in my life the smoke and mirrors that have been used up there recently. As you know, you and I worked together to try in one vein, and that was the state pension system, and trying to get the state to realize its obligations that it made in 1967 to the state pension by paying the 35%, to which they rolled it back to zero, but the 35% never vaporized, and now is the responsibility solely of the Nashua taxpayer. It's phenomenal what Concord does in the rollbacks, and now with the education is just one more thing. But should we as a budget committee, here's my question if I may, anticipate with the chaos up there and the way that the power is being led at the particular time, I'm not sure we might have a budget in a timely manner to when we have our budget. Are you capable to give us what would happen in those type of scenarios?
Sure, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah,
if I
go ahead.
may, John Griffin, CFO. Although we'd love the state legislature to make decisions in time for our budgets, we realize that's a lot of times not possible or practical. So the key behind this budget is to portray a reasonable plan of revenues coupled with, as I mentioned, the mayor's strategic use of the American Rescue Plan. We have until the fall to determine what revenues are coming in and how to set the appropriate tax rate. One of the questions you asked the other day, I believe it was Alderman Dowd of Chief Operating Officer at the school, Dan Donovan, what happens if the 860 pupils come back? Well, as Mr. Donovan indicated, it's all based on October 1st. But the payments that we already receive are based on the 860 less students, and I had provided you communication about a year ago on that, well, half a year ago now in November. So the state gives you that estimate in November about what's gonna happen the following year. And right now, it's producing a $32.8 million amount. Nothing close to the 38.5 last year. So in communication with Mr. Donovan, what will happen is we'll get 25% of that number this year, first quarter. We'll get another 25% of it. And if, in fact, the October 1 numbers are better, we'll get the remaining amount in 2 different payments. So it could happen that this 32.8 is augmented by 4.5 million, which was what the loss was in ADM, which is the pupil count, and free and reduced lunch. So we have time, I guess the answer is we have time. I'm not sure if the state budget, I guess it could go into October, November. I'm not sure, David, I know you.
That doesn't happen very often.
Right, so hopefully it's the August, September timeframe.
Of course, if we recognize that revenue further into the year, it's not gonna help us from a tax rate for 2022,
Correct, it would be. as I
because the
mentioned,
money will be coming in too late.
Correct.
So we'll end up with excess revenues, well, you can call them excess.
It helps, I mean, every revenue is good revenue, but it will help the following
Right.
years. We'll take it, as we
Yeah.
always say.
Alderman Lou, did you have a question? Can't hear you. No?
Okay,
All right.
sorry.
Okay. Any other questions on pages 46 and 40, oh, nothing on 47, 46? Okay. Are there any other school revenues that you wanted to address, or is that it?
I believe that's it, that's the,
Okay, you want to go to appropriations on 136?
if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just briefly discuss, as I mentioned, on the appropriation side, page 135.
Mm-hmm.
What this is this is a rental payment for the taxes that will be rendered in fiscal '22 for that Performing Arts Center building.
Okay,
So, as you can imagine, this is a nominal amount that will eventually grow as the building gets constructed and assessed and so forth. But I wanted to call this to your attention. So we got 50,000 here, and we have 71,000 in revenue in the revenue section. So we're to the good right now. That was as you approved that set of, I think it was like an omnibus thing, but it's complicated. But got a great team working on deciphering all of this stuff, and I just want, these are the two impacts for fiscal '22.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, yes. Alderman Jettie?
I was trying to find what line you were talking about, but and you may have explained this and I missed it completely. So this account, 54808, rent National Performing Arts Center, this is money that we're paying out, and to whom are we paying this?
As you remember, you approved a rental agreement or a lease agreement because the city actually sold the building. And then there's a rental payment that's made to the owner of the building, which I believe is NPAC. And they need to pay property taxes. They use it as there's rent, and then there's additional rent, and the additional rent is the taxes. It's a little bit more complicated than this particular forum, but
Right.
I can definitely get you the details.
All set, Alderman Jettie, or
If I could just follow up.
follow
So
on?
this is about the new market tax credit scheme.
I hate to use the word scheme, but
Right.
plan.
It's a
I didn't mean anything derogatory about that, I just meant it's a plan, right?
Right,
It's a
right.
complicated
It's a
plan.
Right.
Okay,
It has everything to do with that, that's correct.
yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
continuing on.
Page 136.
Mm-hmm.
The appropriations for the financial service. Again, there's not too many changes here overall. The salary adjustments for unaffiliated and UAW is of course found under the 5100 accounts. The increase includes the UAW adjustment of about 14,800 paid out of that UAW education fund that was mentioned on the revenue side. It was part of the agreement to try to get the, some of the lower paid employees, which unfortunately are mostly in my area, a boost. So instead of $15.10 an hour, they might be around $16.50 an hour, which is still very hard to find anybody to apply for in this day. I hope it changes, but right now we're finding very hard to find employees, people to apply. So that's basically that area there. And the other area that went up is postage. And in 2021, the bulk rates were increased, and so the postage went up because of that, but also because since COVID-19, more people are mailing stuff in instead of coming into the building. So we have to mail more stuff out, which is fine, but of course, that increases your postage also. Back last summer, our mailing costs went up 30% each month because we were basically closed till July, and everything was being done by mail or drop-off, and everything was being mailed out, mostly. So that's not happening now, but people are mailing more still than they did before this started, so, which is good. But of course, we have to pay for the postage to mail the things back to everybody.
Okay,
So besides that, most of the line items did not change much at all. Some went down a little, some went up a little, but that was the biggest increase besides the salary area.
any questions on page 136? Any of the committee members? I have one. In the telephone cellular, most of the departments have gone up. a lot of increased usage because of changes in policies. I noticed in your actuals through March 31st, they're 1,650 with a budget of 600, and you're budgeting 622. Do you expect that to be that low, or do you think that your cellular service will increase?
No, it's low. It went up this year because certain employees had to have a cell phone while we were closed. Of course, now that we don't need that.
Okay.
There's only a few people that receive the stipend for that. That's a cell phone stipend.
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted to, and I'm happy not to. But I think there's two?
Well, this, Mr. Chairman, this is my stipend.
Oh,
So the others have been, they don't have it anymore.
so it's just one.
Oh, okay. All right.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
also, I would be remiss if I didn't point out line 52,300.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Benefits due to the adoption of the new plan, high deductible HMO by the unaffiliated and the UAW. I just want to recognize that they were instrumental in saving about $65,751 from one budget to the other. And also, we're part of if you recall, the mayor indicated that he grouped a bunch of like departments and referred to it as City Hall, so we're part of that group to make sure that we came in under budget.
You notice most of the departments have gone down because of the new insurance.
Correct.
Good.
Correct. And one other point on the line above it, most of the departments that you reviewed that have NHRS employees, those lines have gone up, and that's when the mayor talks about $4.4 million of pension increase without even impacting wages. It's completely related to what's called the employer rate. Employer rate went up for a few reasons. One is to get close to full 100% funded in 2039, but also the Board of Trustees of the fund reduced the rate of return another 0.5, and every time you keep going down by 0.5, it's more dramatic on the future earnings of the fund.
I wish Treasurer Fredette were running that account, because we'd be a lot more in the positive than they seem to be doing.
A lot of reasons for that. A lot.
If I may.
Yes, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, but just for clarity, Mr. Griffin, just so that people know that this is hand in hand with the vacancy of the 35% responsibility from the state. The ULL liability was invented by the legislature to come up to make the restitution. So this is another mandate of rollback to the municipality that we are liable for. That will increase the tax rate between the two items, before we even get out of the gate. So shameful, but it's what's happening in Concord. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? So next item is SURF, one of my favorite subjects. And that's, and that's on page 359.
Yes.
Now,
As you know, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
This page is in here each year. It reflects the items that are going to be purchased in '22 from the SURF Trust Fund. Thursday night, when you meet with the police, there's a letter from me on your agenda that is making a slight change here. It's very simple, but the police is replacing, right now, instead of having one of the motorcycles, they're gonna replace a Impala, I think a 2009. It's on that letter that you'll have on your agenda. You already have the agenda for Thursday, so it's like a net increase of 16,000. That doesn't have any effect on the budget or the budget resolution, because all this comes from a trust fund. But I just wanted to point that out anyways.
Question I have on the SURF account, going through these, some of the items that are being bought this year have been in service for 12, 15, 20 years. And some of them are fairly significant costs. why wouldn't we be bonding items like that rather than coming out of the SURF account? I mean, we do it for fire trucks, but some of the fire trucks are obviously wicked expensive. And we're doing it for 4 items right now. No, 3 items for bonding, I believe. But since SURF doesn't exactly function the way the definition states, if SURF worked the way a SURF account should work, we'd be putting money aside every year for something we have in service, so that when it comes time to replace it, we'd have the majority of the funds to buy it. We don't do that. And we have ended up bonding some of the larger vehicles because the bond rate right now is ridiculously low. And I guess the other question I have is, can we package 2 or 3 items and put it under one bond? Do we bond everything that we're gonna buy in SURF under a bond, under a single bond? Question.
Well, there's a lot there, but the SURF plan was changed in 2010 by the current administration and the Board of Aldermen at that time, and that plan,
Disabled.
sorry, somebody talking. That plan at the time had all, mostly the fire engine and ladders and certain public works vehicles to be bonded. Nothing else was going to be bonded under that plan in 2010. Everything else would be cash. But unfortunately, we haven't, as you said, funded it at the cash levels it really needs. Over the years, the mayor has been able to escrow money in there, which has helped.
Yes.
But it is a tough situation. So you could bond more vehicles if you wanted. Personally, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it was agreed at that time that only vehicles from the fire department and public works would be bonded. So that's what we've been doing ever since.
Yeah, I'd only be interested in the really expensive items and not cars and motorcycles, but, and,
Well, like you have a bomb trailer here for 324. That's something
Yeah.
that probably could be bonded. It's
Yeah.
a large amount.
that was one of the ones I had a
And,
question mark on. Was the
Under police, you got that Freightliner.
The bomb
thing,
trailer.
You know, there's a couple other items that could be, yes.
the water truck and the Caterpillar 3120 wheel excavator, which is $275,000 and it's lasted 15 years. Now, on page 360, under the Fund 7026 Capital Equipment Reserve, I believe that's where we buy this stuff out of, correct?
Yes.
That's got $3,633,940. And right now, we're looking at $2,442,175 funded by cash.
Right.
So if we bond it, where do we take into account the debt service on the bonds, and just in your regular bonding scheme?
Items bonded for solid waste is in the solid waste budget, the debt service
Okay.
payments. For the fire department, it's in our general fund debt service budget.
Okay, all right, I knew it was somewhere else. So, anyway, we're not trying to solve that puzzle tonight, but I was just curious if there was a possibility there. And I guess the bigger question is, if we reduce the cash amount that we have to spend out of the SURF account, does that help us in any way on our budget?
No. I
Well,
don't think the mayor's putting,
Where is the line item where is the money that's going back into the SURF account? Is that done in the end of the year in August when we're talking about reappropriating the surplus?
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, let me take a step back. You've dutifully noted that there's a $3.6 million balance in the fund as of March. There's things on the fiscal '21 list that are gonna be bought from that.
Okay,
Then, if you mentioned the $2.4 million that we're asking to approve in this plan, That's coming out of that balance as well. What Mr. Fredette's referring to is when we get to the transfers, the mayor, because of other budget considerations, he's not proposing to put any money into the SURF fund as part of the fiscal '22 proposed budget. What we've done historically is put a sizable amount in through escrow, as Mr. Fredette described last year. I believe it was 1.8 million. So to get anything close to the 2.4, we needed to appropriate 1.8, reappropriate with Board of Aldermen approval into the fund. As far as the fund itself, it ran out of steam in about 2015. It was going pretty good, but we ran into we were bumping up against the spending cap.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways of meeting the obligations of salaries, wages, and other things is you don't fund the full amount of the SURF requirements. So what Treasurer Fredette and others do is they keenly review the requests, and then at the end of, right before we put the budget together, the mayor brings the large users of SURF in, and they do a great job trying to lessen the burden. But as we all know, if you're taking assets that you mentioned are 15, 16, 20 years old and pushing them out, that's not the intent of SURF. The intent of SURF is to fund with cash for those things that you need to buy with cash when they're due. Okay, now another strategy that was used historically before I arrived is the operating department funded about half. Like the fire department would fund like half of the cost of a pumper, half of the cost. But that just eats up budget dollars as well. So when my predecessor, Mr. Gilbar, got here, he said, why don't we not do the depreciation method that I think Alderman Dean used to speak of, but go on the replacement method. And it will work if you have funds to stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think we always kind of lament, that last set of $1 to $2 to $3 million, we really can't fund and have a tax rate that's reasonable.
Okay.
So what we're doing is, we'll hopefully have appropriations not spent that we can once again apply to the SURF and buy things that are desperately needed or that are needed. That's the plan. It's unfortunate because it was a very good plan, but when it comes down to, making sure we have people to do the work that the machine is gonna help do, you kind of go with the worker, less on the machine. And then when you're hit by healthcare, pensions and other things, it's hard to budget. No spending cap plan is gonna be able to assist with controlling costs when they're either federal government mandated, like EPA and NHDES on the state level for wastewater and solid waste. But on the other side, the pension that we just talked about, that's a large dollar value for, as Alderman O'Brien and we testified, it was a good experience for me, but just about every state and town in the state of New Hampshire is affected by it, but kind of to no avail. So that's a little bit about SURF. We could go on a little bit more, but that's what we're trying to do, is manage it as best as possible and get that equipment out to the people that need it to do their jobs.
We could have cut the legislative pay, but they only get $100.
Should charge them more, maybe get some intelligence, I don't know. But
Any questions on SURF? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, forgive me, Mr. Griffin, for not understanding this better, but if you would be so kind as to explain this page 359. So, there are a list of pieces of equipment, vehicles of various sorts, and then it's got purchase year, and then it's got life and current replacement cost, and then it says funded by cash. So, like, for example, the number 16, number 10, from the police department, a 2006 Freightliner MT-55 van purchase year 2006. Lifespan is 16, life, I mean, I guess that's lifespan, 16 years,
That means it's been in existence in Nashville, being used for 16 years.
okay. And then the current replacement cost is listed and funded by cash. Now, is this money that is in a SURF fund, or is this money that it's gonna come out of the general fund?
Mr. Griffin? Or Mr. Fredette,
John
either
Griffin, CFO, this is in the fund, this is in the capital equipment reserve fund.
The next page.
Next page.
Okay, so there is, I guess I misunderstood what Chairman Dowd was talking about. So in fact, we have been putting money aside into a capital equipment reserve fund so that the money is there for us to use to replace these various items now?
That is correct, but as we just discussed, we don't put in nearly enough. We don't put in nearly enough.
Okay,
So last year, the mayor proposed and the board approved about a $1.8 million infusion into this account. Amongst other things, $1.8 million went into this account, and that's why we're able to propose. We couldn't propose this particular page if we didn't have enough money. You'd need a simultaneous appropriation to put it into the capital equipment reserve fund to pay out of it. So we're about a year behind is what, we have to do something for fiscal '23 because the balance, subject to check, is gonna be in the $400,000 to $500,000 range for starters. And then you need about $2.5 to $3 million every year to fund these items.
so, may I continue?
Sure.
So when the chairman asked you, like a $500,000 item, with the bond rates as low as they are now, wouldn't it make more sense to bond this as opposed to trying to come up with $500,000? I'm not sure I understood your answer. Is that a good idea or a bad idea, or?
I think I answered that one.
Okay,
Well, in my own personal opinion, I don't like it, but it could be a good idea. Yes, the rates are very low. So the whole idea of the SURF plan in 2010, which I think Alderman Wilshire was here anyways, was we wanted to pay cash for items. So if it would have been funded properly at $3.5, $4 million a year, we would have had the cash, but it hasn't happened. So yes, you could bond it, and the rates are still very low. So,
I might point out that every time I walk in at Treasurer Fredette's office, he's leery because he thinks I'm gonna ask him for more bond money. He's very conservative on spending bond money, as I'm sure he'll explain further in a few minutes, but that's why he's hesitant. But if you got an item that's gonna last 20 years, 20 years, and we can bond at the current rates 1.63%?
well, that was last fall. Yes.
Last fall. I mean,
yeah, I understand if the rates were, 10 or 12%, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But when it's less than 2%, it's almost like getting free money, isn't it?
Close. Not quite, but close.
It just occurs to me it would be a way out of the current predicament of our having not put enough money into the SURF account to begin with. So now we're short, and we have to, it's being suggested that we need an influx of new money, and, given, the constraints that we're under and this, large, tax rate increase that's hovering over us that everyone fears, that maybe bonding something like this might, for this year, might be a way out.
yeah, I brought it up as something to look at. I'm not suggesting we do them all, but, we certainly might look at all the numbers and see what makes sense, but of course we won't do that this evening, but.
One final point, I arrived in 2010. My predecessor and Mr. Fredette and the then mayor worked very hard on this program. They were coming off, what do they call it, the Great Recession. they were moving from a kind of percentage of erosion or depreciation to this model, which is I have the money funded on the exact year I need to replace it. Certainly, with money at 1.65% on the debt side, we could more aggressively bond these items. The thing about bonding is you definitely have to pay it back. So whether it's 1% or 5%, and you've seen that. I know Alderman Wilshire and probably Alderman Dowd and Alderman O'Brien, you've seen what happens when you bond the gas sets at the landfill and the soil wall at the landfill. At some point, the cash going out equals the debt service, and then every additional debt service is just adding to the problem. So it has to be a combination of both, but certainly can be looked at.
The
Any
other
oth-
thing, I'm sorry, but
Go
the other
ahead.
thing you have to think of too is, remember, we have debt limits in the city. And the city side is 2% of assessed value, so that's something you have to consider too. That's all.
Mayor,
Alderman Jennings?
I thought you pointed out to me recently that we were, on the city side, we were well below that
We're
limit.
below it.
It's the school
The
side.
school side will very well below it, because they have a higher threshold than the city. The city is below it also, but our threshold is not as big as schools, so.
So I might not want to do all of them, but, you know, if financially it works, we might want to do one of them, but we'll wait and see. Any other questions on SURF? Oh, I don't see anyone, so
Alderwoman Lou has her hand up.
Alderwoman Lou, have you fixed the communication issue?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to find out if you could hear me. I'm not going to go back to the questions I have. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
The next item is capital improvements on page 274.
So I have that, Mr. Chairman, John Griffin, CFO. As you can see, the mayor is proposing 1.129 million.
Mhm.
And on the next page is the array of bondable projects, capital projects, I should say. As Mr. Lynch described during his visit here on the budget from the airport, they were able to secure CARES Act funds for their 5%, so that was great. So that's why there's no proposal for airport money in fiscal '22.
Okay, but we are on the hook for the 185.56 for 21?
I'd have, subject to check, he might have covered that as well, but I will check on that.
So just out of curiosity, if that was completely covered by federal funds, what does that allow us to do? Is that something that ends up, we discuss in September if it adds to our unanticipated
Yes, we would
revenue?
discuss it then, yes.
Okay,
As Mr. Lynch mentioned, he's gonna have more projects coming in the future, so we might be able to use it for those. But we'll definitely have a discussion on that particular item.
so just one thing I'm gonna mention, the school deferred maintenance of $100,000 is ridiculous. But, you know, we've got 18 buildings and tons of equipment. And I remember last year or the year before, we had 100,000 in the budget, and they had to replace one pump at the high school for $90,000 out of deferred maintenance. I had a lot of people that said, oh my God, a pump, $90,000? No, the pump's half the size of the room. And I took people on a tour to show them where the pump was. So we've had to bond some things on the school side because they don't have the deferred maintenance. You know, it's one of these pay me now, pay me later. So Mr. Smith is willing to try and sneak by with 100,000 this year, but any glitches that have been, one of the reasons is we're basically building a new school and rebuilding 2 others, so that's under separate funds, so that helps. But typically, $100,000 in deferred maintenance for the school department is crazy. It should be significantly more than that. And we're gonna have to start building that up year to year. Or funds are gonna come from somewhere else. If they have an issue, it's gonna come from somewhere. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Any questions on deferred maintenance? I mean, not deferred maintenance, on capital improvements. Alderman Jettie?
So your original budget was 1.8 million, and the available budget was 5.1.
Which
Where
page you
did
looking
that
at?
extra money come from?
274.
Oh, 274.
So the original 1.8, if you recall, last year, we had the one-time revenues from the state for one-time programs. So that's the difference between the 1.825 and the 1025. The question you're asking is the capital improvements. When we do that year-end moving of escrow money, the first thing we automatically do is move the capital projects forward. So, for example, believe it or not, if we budget 100,000 for the school department deferred maintenance and they spent 90 of it, 10 would go into the following year because it's available. So that's why that number is rather significant. It has a lot to do with the projects that have moved forward in the budget from year to year. So unlike general fund expenses, let's say someone was to escrow money for a conference or a seminar, that's either gonna be spent on that or lapse the surplus. The capital items we carry over, because they're long-lived. So you'll see, as Chairman Dowd pointed out, you're gonna see a modest amount for street infrastructure improvements. You're gonna see a modest amount for fire deferred maintenance. To the extent they don't spend it all in one year, we automatically move it forward. That can be a like for like, so as you recall, you have the like for like that's approved by the mayor, and then the unlike is we're asking the board to use it for a different purpose than the original intent.
Doesn't happen too often, though, especially in those accounts you were just mentioning.
Doesn't happen too often, right?
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on deferred maintenance? I keep calling it deferred maintenance, capital improvements.
You're kind of hung up.
I got stuck on that one, yeah. Had to live with it for too long.
Point taken.
All right, the next then is hydrant fees on 165.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll cover that. The hydrant fees are billed to us by Pennachuck Corporation. And whenever they have a rate increase for Pennachuck Waterworks, which covers the city of Nashua, they raise the costs based on cost of service studies and PUC rulings. They raise the cost to the city. So what we've done here is recommended a $200,000 increase pursuant to their most recent rate increase. And we feel comfortable that we're not gonna underspend this account, which is what we try not to do in any given year. This is up there with street lights, so we try to cover this and make sure we're not looking for an additional appropriation throughout the year.
Okay. Yes, Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, I would just like to say, Mr. Griffin, jump in if I do have it wrong, but it's my understanding, yes, we pay a fee per hydrant, and this is the municipal cost. But however, you gotta keep in mind, our fire trucks pump somewhere in the avenue of 1,500 to 2,000 gallons a minute. We're not charged by the gallon by Pennachuck, correct? So we pay this flat fee. If we have major fires that we do use copious amounts of water, we don't receive a bill from Pennachuck for that.
That's correct.
Good point.
And then, Mr. Chairman, moving on to the page to the right, street lighting.
Street lighting, yep.
As you recall, several years ago, that,
Mhm.
that electricity bill was $850,000 to $900,000. And Mayor Donchis, along with you, the Board of Aldermen at the time, and Director Photo, they had this comprehensive program to put LED lights in where the old, I'm not even sure what they're called, the incandescent lights or something, but whatever the street lights were before was saving a tremendous amount on the wattage charges. So we're comfortable with 500,000. Again, not to go over. The second line, streetlight maintenance, as you might imagine, if there's a street light that goes out, we need to have on stock the replacement light. And then because you need a specialty to change out high voltage streetlights, you need to contract with, we need to contract with Eversource to have them changed. So I'm happy to report that through 3/31, there's only been $4,000 spent on the maintenance part of it. So they've done very well throughout the city. They've stood up to what was recommended and what was anticipated with the lights.
Just to anticipate a question, the new lighting we put along the riverfront, is that covered under the TIF?
I believe so. Any capital investment part of that TIF riverfront project would have been covered under.
So the year-to-year
Installation would have been.
electric costs,
The electric, subject to check, that wouldn't, I believe that wouldn't be covered by the TIF. That would be, unless it's the O&M part of it, but we can check on that.
okay. Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, this has been one of my pet peeves, that the municipality pays for the safety of having streetlights. And unfortunately, from time to time, even with the new LED lights, one may fail and nobody notifies anybody. And we do not pay anybody to drive out at 2 o'clock in the morning to check the streetlights. So if one of our good citizens should notice that a street light is down, that they could go to the pole and see the numbers, poll number in the example 356/22, call that into Eversource, and that could start the ball rolling to repair the light to which we're paying for. So I would recommend any of the citizens that see that, you see a street light down, please let Eversource know so that we can get the best bang for our buck and what we're paying for. Thank you. Do you agree?
I would agree they could contact Eversource or Public Works. Because Public Works is managing this maintenance set of light bulbs.
My experience, at least in my ward, they're changed pretty fast. They don't let them sit there for a long time before they're out there replacing the bulb. And I don't think they have to replace them anywhere near as often when they got the LEDs. It's the old ones that don't last.
Right.
Any other questions on street lighting? All right. Moving along to debt service on page 267.
That would be me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Save for debt. City treasurer. This basically reflects, a few months ago when there were a few bond resolutions with public hearings here, I presented the most current bond plan, and this basically represents that current bond plan for general fund debt service. I know here it says debt service, page 267, but that's this is general fund debt service. We have debt service also in the landfill, wastewater, the special highway fund, and Pennachuck.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's not just on this page. This is the general fund debt service that's paid for with property taxes.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna,
And that plan that I presented showed a list of items that we plan to sell in fiscal year '22. the biggest being the middle school project. Hoping to sell 40 million, only because that wasn't the original plan, but given the rates are so low, I want to try to sell as much as possible, because the rates will probably start going up a little in the next couple of years. They've already started. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of this talk about inflation coming back and everything, so who knows, but anyways, that plan included, that was the biggest, item, but there were, you know, SURF items, there was, the Public Works building, admin building, but I'm not sure exactly where that's going right now. We haven't sold the other building yet, so,
Next week.
I've been hearing that for months, but okay, we'll see. Property, revaluation, public health building, and, some miscellaneous items, so that kind of represents this section here, and it's basically pretty much, flat from the current budget.
Right.
And that's what the plan represented. Next year, fiscal year 23, you'll see some increase, because of course, we will be selling a lot more of the middle
Right.
school bond.
Could be wrong, but I think the public health building is finished, right?
The public health building is finished, but we haven't, that had 3 separate bond resolutions.
Right.
That originally started in 2008.
Yeah.
We had a bond resolution in 2008, one later than that, and then we had one just a couple of years ago, maybe a
Yep.
year ago. So the first 2 resolutions were sold, but the last one was not, so that will be sold this year.
Yep.
Because
All right.
I believe the total was around 3.5 million for the whole project. So anyways, and of course, we estimate the rates, we estimate conservatively. That's why we tend to have money left over in the bond account each year. You know, I try to be very careful about the rates that we use when we plan. I mean, I would never have thought it would have been 1.63. That is really the lowest I've seen in 21 years. And I think if you go back further than that, you won't see that low. That's really tremendously low. So, and even in the taxable bond, if we sold the PAC and hydro in January, we got 1.85 for taxable. Again, extremely low, so hopefully that will last a couple more years while we get through the middle school project.
Yes.
So,
Any questions on debt service?
I have a question.
Yes, Alderman Schmidt.
When we see something more than once, it means that a second bond or a third bond has been issued?
do you have an exact one you can?
We'll say Mine Falls Dam, Series B, Mine Falls Dam, Series A. It's right at the bottom.
One series was taxable and the other one was not. So they break it out. Offhand, I'm not sure which one was taxable, but, they determine, it depends on your contract you have with the company that's running the dam, and they determine how much is taxable and which isn't. So they break it out like that. We have that in Holman Stadium years ago, when they renovated Holman Stadium, with the luxury boxes, portion of that was taxable, the other portion wasn't. So they do that. Not that often, but it does happen.
Thank you.
All set, Alderman Schmidt?
All set.
Okay, any other questions on debt service? Seeing and hearing no one, we'll move on to contingency on page 271.
Mr. Chairman, John Griffin, CFO. Contingency on page 271 has had 4 line items. The first one is what's referred to as the general contingency. Try to appropriate $250,000 a year for things that are unforeseen and unbudgetable, if that's the right word. Contingency education priorities, that's a line that was used for a few years when additional monies came down from the state and there were one-time amounts that, based on a plan from the school department, the Board of Aldermen would basically move that money over to the school and to pay for things. Contingency police grants, this has been an annual grant for, I believe, the Hopper grant. So this is the city match to the grant that, an annual grant that the police department gets. And contingency for negotiation. So I wanted to take you back to your most recent information gathering session with Dan Donovan, the COO of the school department. We move, I know Alderman Dowd indicated that somehow I was the translator in chief, and my staff, Rose Evans in particular, she works with Dan extensively, and she does a great job putting this together. But I wanted to just say that we use all the same accounting. Back when Mr. Donovan and Rose Evans and a few redid the chart of accounts, they made a conscious effort that every like account is the same across every department. So what Mr. Donovan did is he's got a budget when he prepares his budget to communicate effectively to the school board and eventually to provide information to the state on the back end. He's budgeting by building, by program, things of that. But at the core, and I think you got to it, which was great, the two digits are all the same. The 55s are the same, the 56s, the 58s, the 61s, et cetera. So what's really different about his budget when it comes over to us is we add in the benefits, we add in the FICA Medi, and we add in the pension. We also take what he has given us as a contingency for negotiation, we take that money and we put it in this account. So when you asked the great question, Alderman Jettie, how come your budget's going up $5 million? It's very interesting. It went up $5 million because if you take the almost $2 million here and add it to what you saw, it actually was gonna go up $7 million. We took the $2 million out that the mayor kind of granted, as you recall. The mayor proposed a 1.5, school board proposed a 1.7, or the superintendent and Mr. Donovan, and we settled on 1.6. That's that 119,000 that Mr. Dowd, Chairman Dowd mentioned. So I want to just explain this to you because it's very important to how this thing works. The contingency for negotiation is in this account and only gets moved by the Board of Aldermen upon the approval of a collective bargaining agreement. That's when we have the authority as the accounting team to move the money from this particular account into their budget to pay for the increases. I believe there's several bargaining units outstanding at the school, and actually, it's interesting, none at the city. There was a lot, heavy lift last year, as we recall, but most of them, all of them are been settled. Now, at the school, what happened, as the mayor indicated in his opening remarks, we budgeted the school's health care as the programs that are available to them. So that's why he mentioned, they haven't had a chance yet to bargain in good faith and adopt maybe the high deductible HMO plan. But it needs to be in there because if they subscribe to the health care, we need to fund it. So we can go back there and look at it, but that's an increase. And the other one that we spoke of earlier is they've got a fairly sizable increase in pension costs because they are New Hampshire Retirement System members. But I wanted to shed light on that because I took notes on Friday and whenever I watched it, and wanted to make sure that you had kind of a translation, so to speak, from when they send their budget over to what we put in our pages. As you know, we have like 6 pages for the school department. It's a big operation. And Alderman Dowd, with his experience, both reviewing the budget and being on the Board of Education, there's a whole volume of material that's available to everybody. And it gets into the programs, gets into the questions that you asked, Alderman Jettie, like, where do I see in the city budget how much the athletic department costs? You're not gonna see it in here. It's gonna be part of other costs. But there's a whole, my understanding of the school budget is kind of like us. They talk about items, programs throughout their budget session. So they'll have a whole session with the athletic director I'll have a whole session on special education.
Yes.
Have a whole session on curriculum and development, so. I've watched a few, try to watch the Finance and Ops Committee, because that's where the money is kind of talked about. But I found that very helpful if you're trying to learn the kind of the pain points or the strategies that the school department's trying to use. So with that, any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, when the question came up about like athletics, they have, you can get it's probably about that thick. When they have the meeting with the athletic director, Mr. Gingras, you know, every sport is detailed in cost. How many participants, I mean, any possible question you could think of asking in sports would be in that budget, pages. And what Mr. Donovan does is carry over the end number, not all the details that we don't get into. So, but it's all on the Board of Ed website, and you can go over and look at, fortunately, they've been doing most of it digital. I used to get this book like
Right.
this, you know, and killed a lot of trees. So, that would be, oh, the one thing, I think they have 5 unions. I'm pretty sure there's 5 unions and significant number of employees, because one of the unions is teachers. I know teachers, custodians, not sure of the others. I think
There's
one of them was
paras.
field service, I'm not field service, but
Paraprofessionals, and there's secretaries, and there's the AFSCME, the custodian group.
yeah, food service, but they're self-funding, so that's not a real issue. But, so that number possibly could be lower.
The number used,
We put aside a conservative number,
correct.
okay? In other words, maybe a worst-case scenario, if you will, what they're willing to negotiate, but they probably want to negotiate lower, but, you know, and that's only for this year. You know, the contracts are probably 3-year, 4-year contracts, so it's in the out years, so they're still working that. Any questions on contingencies? Nope. All right. Inter-fund transfers on page 272.
Mr. Chairman, I'll handle that. Transfer to city retirement, we recommend the same amount, 500,000. Transfer to SURF, we decided that due to other competing interests, competing items, we didn't put any money in for that. The next 3 items are funded essentially, as you recall, when you met with one of the departments, they talked about the cell towers and the revenues from those cell towers. Those are used to fund these expendable trust funds. Holman Stadium, Mine Falls Park, and David Dean Skateboard Park. There's another transfer for the agreement, Stellos YMCA Capital Reserve. This next line is the housing ETF that Alderman Dow talked about, the 30,000 that went in there this year and the 10 that's gonna go in there next year. Some discussion about parking fees and trying to attain the 728,000, that was not possible. So this transfer to downtown improvement ETF, 100,000, that's pursuant to Alderman Clemens' resolution that recommended at a minimum putting 100,000 into their program. And the transfer to parking ETF, we set that up to capture dollars with the difference from revenue for parking tickets minus the expenses associated with such activity on a calendar year basis. So this is the amount. 155,303, that's the amount, that's the excess of revenues over expenses. in the parking enforcement. So parking enforcement revenue minus parking enforcement expenses provided that number. And that's used to fund parking initiatives such as a study, infrastructure study on the status of the garages and other projects that Director Cummings has come before you to speak of.
So this is funding that's coming out of the general fund into the special revenue funds?
It's coming out of, it's on a calendar year basis, so we actually know what the number is, and it's the difference between the calendar, parking enforcement, ticket revenue minus parking enforcement expenses like the meter people and the maintenance people, and it's reducing surplus revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's creating an expendable trust fund to invest in those programs that Mr. Cummings usually speaks about. And it's a good idea because there's no other funding that I know of that would be able to do that. You've got the parking, you know, the threshold of the 728, which we historically met before the pandemic, funding the Downtown Improvement Committee, so you've got that covered. It's covering the studies or infrastructure needs of what to do with the parking garages and other surface lots.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions on interfund transfer? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at the top, it says transfers in, transfers out. And I see a list of transfers out, but I don't see any transfers in. So, I mean, like the Holman Stadium, the Mine Falls Park, and the David Dean Skateboard Park, we're getting money from the cell phone towers.
Right.
But I don't see where that's coming in before it goes out. Can you explain that?
That's a great question, Alderman Jettie. The to and from is kind of a traditional accounting, fund accounting thing. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's gonna be a to on this page, but the notion is that it's coming from somewhere and going to this. But let me bring you to the, if I may, the cell tower revenues. And I'm gonna look in, I believe, David,
It's on
Treasurer-
page, I think maybe 41 in the yellow pages, maybe.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah. 41.
Yeah, so when you had met, Mr. Chairman, if I may, when you met with the Department of Public Works, they more than likely reviewed the revenues, and that's where you see the Holman Stadium cellular tower fees, Mine Falls, and the skateboard park.
So the revenues from the cell phone tower come into them, but then it gets transferred in this section to the special revenue fund. So it doesn't go into DPW or Park Rec's budget. It goes through it.
And the difference, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that
Yep.
these are expendable trust funds funded by appropriations. So you're appropriating money into these funds. I compare it to when you looked at the food service and other things the other night in the pink pages. Those are special revenue account, funds. Special revenue is they're self-containing. The fees for service match the cost of service. This is, you're gonna have expenses out of it, but you need to put money into it. So your choices are to set up an expendable trust fund funded by appropriations, and that's what you've done here. You also have the opportunity from time to time, expendable trust funds funded by donations. You can accept those, and there's a few of those, but they're all listed at the very back of the book. One we looked at tonight was the capital equipment reserve. You're funding, you can't spend out of it unless you put money into it, so that's how that works.
And each one of them has a spending authority listed.
Correct, there's what's called an agent to expend. Sometimes it's the Board of Aldermen, sometimes it's the mayor, sometimes it's the mayor and I, sometimes it's economic development director, et cetera.
I think we discussed last year whether there are some of those in that account that could be discontinued. Maybe not many, but some.
Right. Right, they're all set up for a purpose. Something happened during the course of the city's evolution and continuing. And I think treasurer for debt, from time to time, you may petition to eliminate them, right?
And we, in the past, have made, have suggested closing some out, which we have, but we haven't done that in a few years.
Yeah.
Similar to how we send bonds like we did last year.
Right.
We've done that for the trust funds too.
Okay. Are there any, Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, if I could just follow up, thank you for that explanation, and I see the amounts, like for the cell towers, the amounts on page 41, for revenue, they exactly match the amounts for transfers out on page 272, so it's that, the money that we're paying into the expendable trust fund is not tax money, it's money coming from the rent of these cell towers.
That's correct.
Correct, thank you.
Any other questions? Any final questions for Mr. Griffin or Mr. Fredette? Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, I had a question. It's not directly concerning the budget that you've explained to us tonight, but we aldermen all received an email from a taxpayer who listed increases. She made a list of what she said were increases in the tax budget from 2015 to 2021. And in 1 year, from 2019 to 2020, she says the tax rate went up from 1.3% to 20.82%, and that over that period of time, which I think is 8 years, it went up a total of 41.87%. Have you seen this email? Have you had a chance to review it? Do you have anything you'd like to say about it tonight?
I did see it, and my quick review is knowing that we didn't have a 20% increase in any 1 year because the tax rate would have been significantly higher. I believe the author of that might have used the general fund appropriations for the first several years, like 15, 16, 17, and maybe shifted to the resolution that's provided to the state to include general fund, special revenue funds, and the enterprise funds, because that would get you that. If you only included general fund for a certain period of time, and then you might have taken the wrong number and you added those other items, you're gonna get a large increase. And I think my quick read of it, she continued using the same metric in the most recent years. And we can certainly put together what it would be for general fund, because we generally report on that every year to the Board of Aldermen. And the special revenue funds, they're pretty consistent, but as we just described, the wastewater and the solid waste may go up and down based on the requirements, the capital requirements, most importantly, of those areas. So, but the simple answer to your question is it needs to be consistent from 1 year to the next as to what the basis is. General fund would be what the taxpayers like to see, a modest increase in the budget.
Alderman Jettie?
So the tax rate reflects the general fund, what comes out of the general fund. These other funds, like the solid waste and wastewater, those are self-funded. Those come out of they don't come out of the amount that people, you know, the property tax bill, they come out of fees for wastewater, you know, and, you know, other, I'm not sure I'm explaining it
No,
correctly.
I
You could probably-
can, yeah, like,
I'm sure you can explain it
Mr.
better.
Chairman, if I may, the wastewater, as Director Photo indicated, when she appeared, that's and she called it kind of a true enterprise fund, but they're both enterprise funds. That's where the fees associated with the wastewater activities are funded completely by user fees. In the city of Nashua, we don't have enough revenue to fully fund the solid waste activity. That's not a problem. It just means, as you've seen on the transfer to the general fund, you need money from the general fund into that solid waste fund. And you've seen that in the green pages, where we simply list the revenue, let's say 3 million, and the expenses are 9 million. You need a $6 million appropriation. So that is an effect on the taxes. Part of the property taxes are paying for solid waste services. And if you look at it, you could not increase the user fees enough to have it fully paid for. I know certainly the alderman here, there's been discussion of why don't we separate the collection part of solid waste, put that in like the streets department, and then, but it's probably not worth changing the operation significantly. It seems to work pretty well. So those are the differences. And the special revenue accounts, you don't want to have those in the calculation because those wouldn't affect the taxes as well. And furthermore, this is kind of a treasurer for debts alley, but when he does the tax rate, the first thing they ask us is what's our general fund appropriations. We have to submit, you know, documents up to the DRA that are signed by the city clerk and all of that. There's a whole process called the MS process to get the tax rate certified by the state.
Alden, Jettie?
And one last thing, when you have more time, could you produce a response to this email, this question?
Sure,
Okay, thank you.
be happy to, thank you.
Anything else either one of you gentlemen like to add, or? No?
I
Okay.
just wanted to mention again, Mr. Chairman, on Thursday when the police come, again, I just want to, you'll see that memo from me, that the serve page needs to be replaced because of that switch they're making.
Mm-hmm.
So I would suggest that maybe somebody would need to make a motion to replace that page 359 with the one that's attached to the memo that you'll have on your Thursday agenda.
Okay,
It should just be replaced in the book.
all right.
Again, it has doesn't change the budget at all, or the resolution. It's just a change on a vehicle or two.
All right. If there's nothing else, Alderman O'Brien.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to table R-21-142, which is the pending budget, by roll call.
Please call the roll.
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire,
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien votes yes, Alderwoman Kelly,
Yes.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, 6 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion carries, and our 21-142 is back on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
And general discussion? Anyone? No? I don't believe any members of the public online, so no public comment. Remarks by Alderman? We don't need a non-public. Alderman O'Brien,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn by roll call.
please call the roll.
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire,
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien votes yes. Alderwoman Kelly.
Yes.
Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, 6 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion carries, and we're adjourned at 9:09 PM. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, Shoshana.